At first glance, Canada presents itself as familiar terrain. The cities resemble American counterparts, the language flows without translation, and the shared media landscape blurs national edges. Yet beneath this surface familiarity, a quieter dissonance emerges. What initially feels like a softer version of the United States gradually reveals itself as something structurally different. The contrast is subtle, not dramatic, but it carries weight. The difference is not announced. It is absorbed. Many Americans arrive expecting adjustment to be minimal. The assumption is that daily life will simply slow down or become slightly more polite. Instead, the environment communicates restraint. The streets feel less charged, public spaces less performative. Interactions unfold with fewer sharp edges. There is a noticeable absence of urgency, a lack of social acceleration that defines much of American public life. This absence is not immediately comforting. It feels unfamiliar, even disorienting, precisely because it is quiet. First impressions often center on tone rather than structure. Conversations feel measured. Opinions are expressed with caveats. Confidence appears muted, not absent, but deliberately tempered. Where Americans are accustomed to clarity and assertiveness as social currency, Canadians tend to value neutrality and balance. Emotional volume is regulated. Disagreement exists, but it is carefully managed. This creates an atmosphere that feels calm on the surface, yet guarded underneath. Everyday encounters reinforce this impression. Service interactions are courteous but distant. Strangers are polite but rarely intrusive. Social warmth exists, but it is restrained by an unspoken respect for personal boundaries. Americans may interpret this as reserve or emotional distance, while Canadians often see it as consideration. The result is a social environment that prioritizes smoothness over intensity. This difference extends into public life. The rhythm of cities feels less aggressive. Ambition is present, but it is not constantly displayed. Success is acknowledged quietly rather than broadcast. The cultural emphasis leans toward fitting in rather than standing out. For Americans shaped by a culture that rewards visibility and self-definition, this can feel like a loss of signal. Identity markers become less pronounced, and social hierarchies less explicit. Over time, these small contrasts accumulate. The absence of constant affirmation, the reduced emphasis on personal trajectory, and the preference for consensus over confrontation begin to shape perception. Canada does not demand reinvention or declaration. It offers continuity instead. This shift challenges deeply embedded expectations about how identity, progress, and belonging are supposed to function in daily life. As familiarity deepens, it becomes clear that the difference is not about friendliness or politeness alone. It is about how a society manages emotional temperature, how it distributes attention, and how it defines what is appropriate to express publicly. For Americans, this realization marks the beginning of a more complex cultural adjustment, one that unfolds quietly, without spectacle, but leaves a lasting impression. As this quiet adjustment continues, many Americans begin to notice how deeply these differences are embedded in institutional life. Workplaces operate with a low emotional register. Meetings emphasize process and collective alignment over individual persuasion. Assertiveness, when unfiltered, can register as disruptive rather than impressive. Initiative is valued, but only when it aligns smoothly with group consensus. The cultural signal is subtle but persistent. Standing out too sharply risks unsettling the social equilibrium. This dynamic reshapes professional identity. In the United States, momentum is often rewarded. Speed, ambition, and visible drive signal competence. In Canada, steadiness carries greater weight. Reliability, predictability, and emotional consistency are prized qualities. Career advancement tends to appear incremental rather than dramatic. For Americans accustomed to linking self-worth with forward motion, this can feel like stagnation. For Canadians, it reflects maturity and trust. Social relationships mirror this same pattern. Friendships develop gradually, often through repeated exposure rather than instant chemistry. Invitations are extended cautiously. Emotional disclosure unfolds over time, not as an opening gesture, but as a sign of earned familiarity. Americans may perceive a lack of openness, while Canadians perceive a respect for emotional pacing. Intimacy is not withheld, but it is carefully staged. Public discourse reinforces these norms. Conversations about social issues rarely escalate into overt confrontation. Language is softened, edges rounded. Moral certainty is often replaced by nuance. While Americans may experience this as a lack of conviction, Canadians often view it as social responsibility. The priority is maintaining cohesion, even at the expense of clarity. Passion exists, but it is expressed through moderation rather than urgency. Even humor reflects this cultural calibration. Sarcasm is gentler, irony more understated. Self-deprecation replaces self-promotion. Loudness, whether literal or symbolic, draws attention in ways that feel uncomfortable. The prevailing instinct is to lower one's profile rather than amplify it. This creates an emotional landscape that feels evenly lit, without dramatic peaks or valleys. Over time, this environment begins to exert subtle pressure on behavior. Americans may find themselves speaking more cautiously, softening opinions, or hesitating before asserting preferences, not out of fear, but out of adaptation. The culture does not punish difference overtly. It absorbs it quietly. The result is a slow recalibration of expression. This recalibration can feel both relieving and unsettling. The reduction of constant comparison eases psychological strain, yet it also removes familiar markers of progress. Without the external validation loops common in American life, meaning must be sourced differently. Routine, stability, and social continuity take on greater importance. The question shifts from how far one is going to how well one fits. As these reflexes soften, the emotional landscape begins to change. Life feels less performative, less driven by visible benchmarks. The constant calibration against others, so embedded in American social life, fades into the background. Comparison still exists, but it is muted, less central to identity. Without the pressure to constantly declare purpose or progress, daily life settles into a calmer, more regulated rhythm, one that feels deceptively simple, yet culturally dense, as this rhythm becomes normalized. Many Americans begin to sense a deeper shift taking place beneath the surface. The culture does not merely slow behavior, it reshapes expectations around emotional presence. Intensity is not eliminated, but it is redistributed. Feelings are managed privately rather than expressed publicly. Satisfaction is quieter. Frustration is diffused rather than confronted. The emotional environment favors equilibrium over catharsis. This has subtle psychological effects. Without constant stimulation or affirmation, attention turns inward. Motivation becomes less reactive. The absence of pressure to continually signal ambition or identity allows space for steadier routines to take root. For some Americans, this creates a sense of relief, as if the nervous system has been given permission to stand down. For others, it introduces a vague disorientation, a feeling of emotional flatness where highs and lows once provided definition. Civic life reinforces this equilibrium. Institutions are designed to dampen volatility rather than channel it. Policies evolve incrementally. Public trust is built through predictability instead of dramatic reform. The social contract prioritizes continuity over reinvention. In this environment, progress is measured by stability maintained rather than ground gained. Americans accustomed to associating change with momentum may struggle to recognize movement at all. Over time, the contrast clarifies itself. Canada does not ask its inhabitants to constantly narrate their purpose. It does not require visible striving to legitimize presence. Belonging is less conditional, but also less affirming. Recognition comes through consistency rather than distinction. The reward is security, not exhilaration. This recalibration of values subtly reshapes worldview. Identity becomes less performative and more situational. Life organizes itself around systems rather than stories. The emphasis shifts from becoming to continuing. For Americans shaped by a culture of reinvention, this can feel like a narrowing of possibility. For others, it feels like relief from the burden of perpetual self-definition. The difference, ultimately, is not one of warmth or coldness, ambition or complacency. It is a difference in how societies regulate emotional energy. One amplifies it to generate movement. The other absorbs it to preserve balance. Neither approach is neutral. Each produces a distinct psychological climate, shaping how individuals relate to work, relationships, and themselves. Canada's unfamiliarity lies in this quiet insistence on moderation. It offers a version of life where intensity is optional, not required, where progress is subtle, where identity does not need constant reinforcement. For Americans, encountering this environment can feel surprisingly transformative, not because it demands change, but because it allows stillness. And in that stillness, a different understanding of what it means to live well slowly comes into view.